Hi everybody! So today we're going to talk some more about Draconic Charts. I got a question in the last video that I made about Draconic Charts, about how I work with Pluto in the Draconic Chart. And it's a very good question because Pluto and the Pluto polarity point are things that I look at in the Draconic Chart. I definitely do. I think they're very important. So very good question. But before I talk about that, I probably need to mention how I work with Pluto and even the Pluto polarity point in my karmic and past life reading when I'm doing the part from the natal chart. Like part one of this reading deals with the natal chart, looking at like the South Node and Pluto and everything. And it's essentially looking at to see kind of what the most previous lifetime tied to this one might have been like. Not necessarily your most recent previous lifetime, but just the one most tied to this one. That could be like 3 lifetimes back, right? But I feel like the themes that are there, you know, might come around again in this lifetime. So I probably need to explain kind of what I do there first to how I work with it in part 2 of my karmic and past life reading, which deals with the draconic to natal comparison, to kind of help that make sense as to how I work with it. But first, before I do that, I want to throw my disclaimer out there that I you know, these videos are videos that tend to get people leaving comments, what this is bullshit, Draconic Charts are bullshit, blah, 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 blah. I don't care. You are free to have your opinion, but I don't give a fuck what it is. And I'm talking about the comments that they're not wanting to have discussions about things or conversations. They're just wanting to throw out an opinion that adds nothing to the conversation. And I will not engage with these kinds of comments. When I first started making videos, I would. But I decided that's a waste of my time. Why hope I give that any weight or any air? So if you leave comments like that, you are free to have your opinion, but they will get ignored because I don't give a fuck. And the people that are interested in Draconic Charts don't give a fuck either. They don't care. So I'm just throwing that out there. You are free to do whatever you want, but they will get ignored. I'm also not trying to change your mind. I'm just throwing information out there. And this was actually a question that was asked, so I figured it was a good video to do. But yeah, perhaps watching something that resonates more for you would be a more worthwhile way to spend your time. So anyway, back to Pluto in the Draconic Chart. Okay, so when I'm doing part 1 of my karmic and past life reading, I'm looking at, obviously, the South Node, where the planetary ruler of the South Node falls, aspects made, right? All of that kind of stuff. If there are any squares to the nodes, these kinds of things, to kind of give an idea of what the past life story, what the past life themes probably were. Now, I also work with Pluto the same way. I work with Pluto in a similar way that I work with the South Node. So I'll look at where Pluto falls, any aspects that Pluto makes. Same thing like okay, like my Pluto's in Scorpio, but like let's say you were the Pluto and Libra generation. I would also be looking at where Venus falls in your chart, since Venus is the ruler of Libra, to kind of flesh out the past life story even more. Adds another dynamic to it. Now then, to look at kind of what you wanted to learn this time around, what your mission may have been, what have you. I'll look at the Pluto polarity point, and I'll look at the North Node, planetary ruler of the North Node, where the planetary ruler of the Pluto polarity point falls, aspects made, all of that stuff, to come up with the reading that I come up with, and other things too. But that's the major part of it. Okay, so that's how I work with it in those sorts of that part 1 of the reading. So in part 2 is about the draconic to natal comparison. In this report, I don't really talk about just the draconic chart by itself. A little bit, I mean, bits and pieces, but it really is more of a draconic to natal comparison. I do think that is the way it's the most beneficial to the person. Though, like I said in the last video, I definitely encourage people to look at the draconic chart by itself. And if you ever want me to just do that for you, like, you're like, I don't want the comparison, I just want to know about my draconic chart, let me know, and I'm happy to do that too. It's just not the standard way that I do it. Standard way. But in the Draconic chart is set to where the nodes are at 0 degrees Aries. North node is at 0 degrees Aries. South node is at 0 degrees Libra. That's how this chart is created. And that's how it essentially creates the new chart from your chart and moves things around. Unless you're like me and you have your natal north node at 0 degrees Aries. They'll be exactly the same. But for most people, they'll move a little bit. So that's why I don't really work with the draconic north and south nodes. They don't really stand out to me because of that, because everybody's draconic chart will have the north and south nodes at 0 Aries and 0 Libra. What I do look at though is Pluto and the Pluto polarity point, the draconic Pluto polarity point. Okay, so I think that before we start incarnating here in this realm, I want to say this in a way that's not confusing. Okay, so before we start incarnating here in this realm, we come from somewhere else. Where that is, I don't really know. I don't know. Not exactly. But we come from somewhere else. And we come into this realm with certain things that are comfortable to us or known to us or understood by us, right? That's what Draconic Pluto is. It is what we understand, what we know, what we are comfortable with. When we start incarnating here in this realm, in this dimension, on Earth, what have you. This is what we're comfortable with. The Pluto polarity point, the Draconic Pluto polarity point, on the other hand, is what we wanted to understand, what we, across all incarnations, not just this one lifetime that we're living right now, but across all incarnations in this realm, in this dimension on Earth. The Pluto polarity point is what we wanted to grow into. And you'd also want to look at like where the planetary ruler of the Pluto polarity point falls. You know, you'd want to look at it and I would look at it in the same way that I look at natal Pluto and the natal Pluto polarity point. I would just expand the lens out and know that nobody's going to figure this out in one go around, right? Like it's going to be each lifetime is going to either, I mean, I'd like to think in each lifetime we make progress. I'm sure that in some lifetimes we regress. I'm sure that happens. I'm sure it does. I'd rather not think that, but I think it probably does happen. But the goal across all lifetimes in this realm is the Pluto polarity point. And then where the planetary ruler of the Pluto polarity point falls by sign, house, aspects made, all that stuff. Yeah. So that's kind of how I work with this. Now, I won't go through each and every Pluto and each and every, you know, sign in the Draconic chart. But like, let's say you had Draconic Pluto let's say you had it in Libra. You'd also want to take into account where, you know, where Pluto is in your natal chart too, to kind of, and I say that because you'd want to, I like to think of it like, okay, like even if I'm looking at the Draconic chart, like Draconic Pluto and Libra, I'm thinking, okay, there's probably something about this person that where they're coming from, where they're coming from a place of perhaps being more relationship focused, perhaps being a harmonizer, perhaps being comfortable balancing, you know, all these sorts of Libra things. There could be some indecision, there could, you know, or there could be complete imbalance because Libra energy tries to balance, and sometimes it can be incredibly unbalanced because it's trying to balance so much. So you could be looking at anything like that, right? And there are other things that you could be looking at too or thinking about. But so I look at that, and then I would also take into account where like natal Pluto falls to see kind of how that might fit in, if that makes sense. Or how Draconic Pluto might fit in with natal Pluto as an undercurrent. So then you'd be looking at the Pluto polarity point, the Draconic Pluto polarity point falling in Aries, which would definitely be more like less indecisive and more action focused, wanting to lean more into that, wanting to lean more into drive, into impulse, into concept of self even, you know, being more self-focused, not in a selfish way, just not quite as focused on partnerships, more focused on, yeah, on like the self. So, and that would be something that I would be thinking that the person wanted to learn how to do across all lifetimes. Now, I do think some lifetimes, I will say this, I don't think there's ever just one lifetime where you learn it all. I've said that already here, but I want to drive that home. I do not think that's the case. But I do think there can be lifetimes that are very important to the Draconic Pluto polarity point. And those lifetimes tend to be the ones, or this is just kind of my theory here with this. These lifetimes tend to be the ones where you've got like a conjunction, a natal conjunction with the Draconic Pluto polarity point, right? And I, you know, if you have that going on, that makes that planet or planets, they're very in line, right? They're blended with the Draconic Pluto polarity point, with what the soul's mission, or however you want to think about that, how the soul's mission is geared, what the soul mission is, all of these things, these planets, these natal planets are kind of fused with this. So I would definitely feel like in a chart like that, like let's say the moon was conjunct the Draconic Pluto polarity point. That might mean that there was something about the emotions, the person's emotions in this incarnation, that were very important for them to do something with. What would depend on the whole chart, right? But something about the person's emotions are important for getting closer to the Draconic soul mission. That is every once in a blue moon, I find that's not the case, but generally it is. Generally, it is the case. If there is a planet, if there is a natal planet conjunct the Draconic Pluto polarity point, it is very, very important. Or it feels that way to me, very important over the course of all lifetimes. Something that they're supposed to learn in this lifetime is very important over the course of all lifetimes. It almost feels like it could be a way for the person to level up, if you will. Or get closer to their soul mission, their Draconic soul mission. Now planets, natal planets conjunct Draconic Pluto, I might think of those as like those planets in the natal chart or planet or whatever. There might be something that they need to understand differently in this lifetime or function differently, because that conjunction, right, with that natal planet to Draconic Pluto might feel more comfortable. But comfortable here in this context isn't necessarily where you should stay, right? Because you're supposed to move forward or learn to balance. So I would definitely take note of that too. And really want to take a look at how that planet might need to function a little differently so that it's not stuck in any hang-ups with Pluto, with Draconic Pluto. That kind of makes sense. I hope that makes sense. But it's just kind of expanding the lens even further. That's kind of how I think about this, bringing the lens out even further instead of just thinking about one lifetime back or whatever. It's all lifetimes. Now, I don't think you can get, some people might be able to. I don't think you get real precise with a whole bunch of past lifetimes from this context, but you can definitely get a good idea of what the person came into all these incarnations being comfortable with, understanding, what have you, and then what they wanted to learn across all incarnations and what they wanted to grow into and understand better with the Draconic Pluto polarity point. And where the planetary ruler of that falls in the Draconic chart. And if any natal planets conjunct the planetary ruler of the Draconic Pluto polarity point, I would also take note of that in the same way that I would take note of a natal planet conjunct Draconic Pluto polarity point. That would seem important too. But that's kind of how I work with it. If you have any questions, hopefully this made sense. Hopefully. If you have any questions, feel free to ask, because I feel like this might have been more confusing. if you are curious about me doing any kind of work like this for you, I will put where you can find me below. This actually is some of my favorite work to do. I love doing it. The karmic and past life stuff and the draconic chart. The draconic chart stuff. I cannot speak today. I think it has to do with the eclipse. It's a anyway. But I'm going to get going, and I will see you all later.